What does it mean to be anti-white? I think it just means saying anything that would be offensive to white people, whether it is true or not. Obviously, this is a term that is impossibly wide and really not academic, shall we say. So if you want to define a word, you really need to you need to define the idea that defines the word. So we have to look into the background against why white people would be using this ridiculous term. I mean, obviously they see the world in terms of race, which is racist, isn't it? And now they take any form of criticism as being anti-white, and presumably they use this terminology in order to accuse others of racism because they have been accused of being racist for so long. But instead of adopting the tactic of denying the concept of race, as I have, in fact, I say that the racial divide is really a red herring. These subtleties of thinking are not understood at all. So it would appear that white people are thinking in very crude racial terms rather than diagnosing the problem correctly. So what they see is that the world is apparently against them, and they have to adopt the rules of the people who use this weapon against them. Well, my strategy would be to undermine completely the entire basis of intersectionality. Red herring. Very good. So it's a new term, isn't it? That, just to see the world in these crude racial terms. And I suppose feeble-minded white people would say, well, they were forced into this corner by their establishment, and I suppose they would say, by the Jewish media into looking at these things in this way. And I have been accused of being racist myself by somebody who obviously doesn't like other races coming to his country, telling him what to do. But he's adopting the terminology of his enemy. And this is always a mistake in my view. If you adopt the terminology of your enemy, then it means that your enemy controls the terms of debate. And really, if you don't accept his premise, then you shouldn't be adopting his words. So you would challenge him at every step. So to call behavior towards you as a white person as anti-white is counterproductive, because you are using the terminology of your enemy and allowing your enemy to control the terms of the debate, and you are not really thinking your problem through. So because I have been accused of saying offensive things, saying things that are found to be offensive by white people, Joe in particular, he's an educated man, but he's a little cagey about disclosing his marital status, as if he thought, he was going to be doxxed just because he he if he discloses his marital status, which is obviously exaggerated, and obviously he won't tell me his marital status because he's not married, and he has no prospect or intention of becoming a married father, and for that reason he has no particular solution to the problem, to our social and political problems now. He only knows that he doesn't want to accept mine because he is an Islamophobe, and he's obviously an Islamophobe because he already acknowledges that the current moral and legal political system is broken, but he doesn't want to replace it by anything that would be considered viable in the long term. All he is anxious to assert is his status above me, and it doesn't come across as very convincing at all. So how should we deal with being anti-white, assuming we were white? If I were white, I wouldn't be using this terminology because it's a terminology that ethno-nationalists and stupid people use. So I wouldn't want to be using words that would identify me as being racist and stupid. I would say that being anti-feminist is not being anti-white. If you think that feminism has caused white people to become degenerate and weak and frightened and unable to formulate arguments to argue their case, instead they dig deeper by using ever more problematic words that will just identify themselves as racist and give weapons to their opponents. But I don't expect anonymous people, my anonymous detractors such as Joe, to take into account these problems, because as he says, he's not a political activist. He doesn't really care in the long term what happens. He doesn't think it's up to him to really do anything or even propose solutions. He thinks it's just his role to object to solutions that he doesn't like on the basis that I wasn't born in this country. But has anybody born in this country proposed anything viable? Of course not. So I've explained what the problem is, and he denies it, anonymously, of course, and then accuses me of racism. Obviously, I deny it, and obviously, it would be silly of me to be racist because it's not a concept that I even acknowledge. I don't think white people are like that because of their skin color. I think white people are the way they are, in deep, deep trouble because of their political system, their culture, their lack of a functioning moral system, at least effective at maintaining minimum standards of morality, and 2,000 years of Christian history, which incidentally Joe also rejects because he's a militant atheist, overflowing and fizzing with contempt for people of belief. I've explained to him many a time that the people that he considers his opponents have the benefit of religion, people such as Jews and Muslims. It is Muslims in particular that he particularly hates and fears. But he has no other solution other than to propose what he regards as moderate proposals that he knows will be ignored anyway, such as withdrawing welfare benefits from unmarried mothers. No. By the time they are by the time they're pumped out, they're bastards. What are you going to do? You're going to let them starve on the streets? Surely you should warn them not to do this thing and then punish them when they do the thing that you warn them not to do. All my solutions are practical and based on the moral and intellectual authority of the hypothetical supreme authority. So, is Joe really saying that to question feminism, to oppose intersectionality, to diagnose the problems caused by 250 years of liberalism and 2,000 years of Christianity is anti-white? Perhaps, but it is not a helpful way of putting things. To see things in such raw racial terms is only bound to be inflammatory and unnecessarily divisive. So, the problem of degenerates is that they are unable to discuss ideas without descending into insults, abuse, telling lies about their opponent in the hope of demonizing and discrediting, and therefore eventually marginalizing and silencing them, which is incidentally the tactic of the matriarchy. So I am saying that the problem is matriarchy, and matriarchies are established on the foundation of bastardy and unmarried parents who do not properly parent their offspring. And while I know that there will always be exceptions to the rule, such as married parents being terrible parents and unmarried parents being excellent parents, I am talking about the statistical probability of finding oneself disadvantaged if one finds oneself in a fatherless home. It is obvious to me that government policy should be geared towards preventing these things, but being a matriarchy and being always inclined to take the easiest way out, the government does not dare to criticize anyone in case it loses votes. So, if that is a problem, and obviously democracy is a problem, representative democracy is a problem, and this is what I say is wrong. And therefore I have no qualms about proposing a one-party theocracy governed by the principles of secular Koranism, and this triggers Joe into his abuse, insults, and accusations. But this doesn't prove that I don't care about white people or don't like them. After all, if I really hated them, I would have left the country a long time ago. I wouldn't have been staying here for such a long time and trying to reason with a people who are obviously suffering from neurosis and amnesia and possibly dementia. And we can talk now about these things as America squares itself up to start possibly another world war in Europe, which is the continent on which I live. I don't know what Boris Johnson thinks he's doing. Obviously, it's not anything that would be in a national interest, since it would be in the interests of European nations to have cheap gas and not be picking fights with Russia. But judging from what the press are reporting, you wouldn't know this. So what I propose is government in the national interest, and obviously, if we have sensible people, wise leaders who are not afraid of being accused of a historic sexual offence, then we are more likely to be better governed than under the current system where a prince can be accused of a historic sexual offence for doing something that was perfectly legal in his own country. So there are many, many such questions that should be asked and answered, but nobody seems able to ask them apart from me. And when I do, I get unhelpful comments from Joe, who really can't get over the fact that I wasn't born in this country, yet dare to propose solutions that he himself dare not propose. So this is a problem I face. So obviously there's something wrong with white people if they can't think themselves out of a paper bag, if they can't admit that democracy is possibly not the best way of governing your country. When you think the Iranians don't behave this so badly, the Russians don't behave so badly, the Chinese, well, they're not the ones being aggressive and trying to start wars and picking fights with people. It is Western governments who are doing this sort of thing, and it is a very dangerous thing to pick fights that will end in war and possibly another world war. Or at the very least, financial disaster and rising prices and rebellion and revolution in your own country. But that's all I wanted to say. I want to confirm that I do not see the world in crude racial terms, but it's inevitable that I would be talking about white people if I live in the West, and I'm concerned about them. And if Joe is just going to be womanish and pretend to be offended at everything I say, even though it's true, and he can't argue against it, then he is certainly part of the problem. And the problem is too many men thinking, talking, and behaving like women, using the rules of intersectionality.